Welcome to episode 62 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who's not familiar with our podcast, please check back to episode 1 for a discussion of our goals and our ground rules. If you have any question about those, please be sure to contact us at EpicureanFriends.com for more information. In this episode 62, we continue our discussion of the perils of romantic love. Our text comes from Latin lines 1141 through 1208 of Book 4, and today we have Martin reading the text. Let's join the discussion now.
These are the misfortunes that attend an amour ever so fortunate and constant, but the miseries of a wretched and disastrous love are innumerable, and obvious to everyone with his eyes open. You had better therefore be upon your guard beforehand, and observe the rules I have laid down to prevent you of being caught, for this is not so difficult to avoid being drawn into the snares of love as to disengage yourself from the net when you are taken, and to break through the strong knots which Venus ties close upon all her votaries. And though you are entangled and within the net, you may still avoid much of the evil, unless you wilfully set yourself against the remedy. First then, you are to take no notice of any imperfections, either of mind or body, you find in the mistress you admire and fondly love. All lovers, blinded by their passion, observe this, and attribute beauties to the fair to which they have no real pretence, and therefore the ugly and deformed we see have their several charms, and secure sovereign power over their admirers. The lover that has such a forbidding dowdy for a mistress is laughed at by his companions, who advise him to appease Venus and render her propitious, while they think nothing of their greater misfortunes in placing their esteem upon others less lovely and less beautiful. The black seems brown, the nasty and rank is negligent, the owl-eyed is a Pallas, the sinewy with her dry skin is a little doe, the dwarf of the pygmy breed is one of the Graces, wit and spirit all over. The large and gigantic is surprising and full of majesty. If she stammers and cannot speak, then she lisps. She is modest if she is dumb. But the turbulent, the violent, and the talkative is all fire. If she is worn away with the consumption, she is my slender love. You may span her in the waist if she is dying with the cough. The two-handed virago with her full ducks is Ceres herself, a bedfellow for Bacchus. The flat nose is my Silene, a little satire. The pouting lip is a very kiss. It would be endless to say all that might be offered upon this subject. But allow your mistress all the advantages of beauty in her face, that charms of love arise from every limb. Yet there are others as lovely as she, and time was when you lived without her, and we know she plays the same game that homelier women can do as well. And then she perfumes, rank as she is, with filthy smells, that her maids cannot come near her, but make a jest of her when they are not seen. But when the lover is shut out, and all in tears crowns the gates with flowers and garlands, and pours ointments upon the stately pillars, and the wretch warms the very doors with his kisses, yet when he is admitted, and one blast from her armpit strikes full upon him as he enters, he presently seeks for a plausible reason to be gone, and all his long-laboured speeches of complaint are forgotten, and he condemns himself of folly for raising such ideas of her beauty, which no mortal could lay claim to. This secret is well known to women of the town, and they act cunningly behind the scenes as it were, and conceal their failings from those whose love they would secure fixed and lasting to themselves. But all to no purpose, for you may easily imagine how things are, and discover all, and prevent their utmost endeavours to deceive you. And if your mistress be of an open temper, and not sullen and reserved, she will not so much as hide her defects, but hope you will allow for imperfections that are common to the whole sex. Nor does the woman always breathe with faint desire when joined in strict embrace with him she loves, when she holds him close, and on his pressed lips imprint her balmy kisses. For she often does it heartily, and strives to share the common joy, and run the heats with vigor to the goal. Nor for any other reason would birds and herds and wild beasts and cattle and mares bear the weight of the male if they did not burn and rage with equal heat, and so receive with joy the lusty leap. Don't you observe how those whom mutual pleasure has bound fast are tortured as it were in common bonds? How dogs in the street are striving to untie the knot and pull with all their might a different way, yet they stick fast in the long ties of love. This they would never do if not engaged in mutual joys, which cheat them with delight and hold them fast. The pleasure then is common to them both.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. That one was a good passage to read in that German accent that doesn't convey some of the sarcasm that might be there. So. Anybody who says that Lucretius doesn't have a sense of humor, or it's definitely not super serious, all of it. Who wants to start with this passage today?
That seems to be the question.
Well, starting with the very first paragraph, when I was preparing this one today, it struck me how almost modern that first paragraph is written. And what's being said is just very, very clear that he's just finished last week talking about misfortunes that can happen from love. And then he says, these are the misfortunes that attend a love ever so fortunate and constant. But the miseries of a wretched and disastrous love are innumerable and obvious to everyone with his eyes open. You better therefore be on your guard beforehand and observe the rules I've laid down to prevent your being caught, for it is not so difficult to avoid being drawn into the snares of love as to disengage yourself from the net when you're taken, and to break through the strong knots which Venus ties close upon her votaries. We were talking last week about how he seems to get carried away. I think this is more, he's either been burned himself or...
Apparently. Oh my goodness. I would love to hear more of those details about Lucretius.
Well, that probably explains, it's been a long time since we talked about Lucretius personally, but, there's the only recorded alleged event of his life was that supposedly he committed suicide under the influence of a love potion or something like that, which I think is probably not true, but that's what's recorded by one of the church fathers. Charles, you remember which one that is who records that? But that's the only biographical detail that's out there about Lucretius. But I would suspect that somebody reading all this material through here would probably come up with something like that, because people observe that there's no way that some lunatic composed this poem. He's not mad. He's brilliant. But about love, he certainly has strong opinions.
Yeah. So first he says, just better to avoid getting caught. But then if you get caught, the second what to do. But so I think we have to take this sarcastically, right? The second sentence here.
Yes.
First, then you are to take no notice of any imperfections.
Okay,
he's not saying that literally.
Well,
because then you would stay caught.
Yeah, that's what it says in the 1743 edition about take no notice. But that seems counterintuitive. It seems like he's telling you that you should take notice of these things.
Right.
And so when you read and compare what Monroe and Bailey says, I think you don't see it constructed quite the same way. In fact, I don't see that at all.
It's not even in there.
Bailey and Monroe. No.
Okay.
And in fact, I think I've read in other places that this section tends to be homogenized, or what would be a good word for it. This is such a delicate series of discussions here that it's hard to say whether the translators have been faithful to the original Latin and whether we're really as graphic as the original was or not.
Interesting. Okay, so here in Bailey it says, and yet even when trammeled and fettered, you might escape the snare unless you still stand in your own way and at the first overlook all the blemishes of mind and body in her whom you seek and woo. So that's much more clearly saying don't overlook, the problems.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't gone back to the Latin to try to figure out whether Bailey and Monroe are correcting it or whether the 1743 is just wrong. But this might be a position where 1743 is just not as good a translation at all on that sentence there.
So this is. Oh, so go ahead, Martin.
Actually, I like this translation because it makes sense when we read the next sentence. Because he says it's a way so that you don't take notice and then you really fall deeply into this love, no? Because
he's saying what not to do in this translation. He's not meaning that seriously. He's saying this is how you get into trouble.
Yeah, he could be there transitioning and just describing how it is you willfully set yourself against the remedy, because that part it could be just a transition issue between those phrases, because surely he is being sarcastic. I mean, whether it's intended to be humorous or whatever, he's drilling it home very, very, very emphatically. by using all of these examples of types of people. And, that's where I was joking at the beginning about Martin's delivery was very even. You could certainly work up some humor in this if you were so inclined to do so.
And so this actually reminds me of, even though I do not agree with people who think that Buddhism and Epicurean philosophy are very closely related, this is similar to some of the exercises that in Buddhism to cure, this painful desire by imagining this person that you've fallen in love with decaying, dying and rotting and having maggots eat them and stuff. And, yes, it's like, so that it's kind of aversive therapy, or it's like some of what the hypnotists do for people who are on a diet. They'll have them imagine all sort of garbagey, gross stuff about food that they don't want to eat anymore, so that it seems disgusting to them and they're not interested anymore.
It's like a Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. This is clearly what that is. All this discussion that the Stoics like to talk about their techniques for doing things. Well, this is clearly a technique that he is suggesting that you follow so as to avoid the trap of this particular danger.
It's still advice given by modern dating coaches for people who have a tendency to get infatuated, and they've gone out on a date or two with somebody and they're planning their wedding, right? They're like, doodling stuff about putting their names together and things like that. And so the coaches say things like, you really don't know if this person is a serial killer. You don't know anything about him. Imagine all the things that could be up with this person that you don't know anything about. And thinking about that will help you back off from idealizing them and instead take time to get to know who they really are before you make any kind of mental commitment. It's good advice.
Yeah, and you've used the key word there when you said idealize. We discussed that last week when you brought that up. This is prescriptions so that you don't idealize somebody or something. That's the key here.
On the other hand, I somewhat disagree with him. I mean, a couple of these properties which he puts up here as something negative consider, I don't think they're negative. So it's just, okay, this is a feature of her, no? It's not a bug, it's a feature, and it's okay. So I don't idealize it, but it's part of her, and then this is fine. So what here, the most of the list here, I would actually say, so what? No?
Right.
Don't you think that's a little different, though, from infatuation, because you actually know her? And that's more beauty in the eye of the beholder, which, if this brings you pleasure, then it's beautiful. There's no absolute definition of beauty. I think if you don't know the whole context of the philosophy, you could almost read this and think he's giving examples of things which are definitely absolutely ugly or definitely absolutely beautiful, which cannot be. Because we're not Platonic, or we don't believe in these ideals of beauty. So I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying things that you don't think are beautiful, but you're ignoring it because of this infatuation. You're idealizing and you're not seeing what you would normally respond to, I guess. It's tricky, because we do see our friends and loved ones differently, and I don't think he's arguing against that.
And getting with the line of thought that Lucretius is speaking from personal experience here, or that he gets carried away, I think that some of the negative things he says here in the second section, we shouldn't take them quite at face value or as some sort of universal statement. I think that's his own personal take.
Yeah, I am kind of surprised to see the colorism in here about the black and brown. That I didn't know that was as much of a thing back then, but appears to be.
Well, Rome was pretty incorporated in northern Africa.
Yeah, but I think this was not racist. This was not based on race. It was just on really on the color appearance.
That's why I said colorism. And so to classify darker skin as less desirable, that's colorism, and it's still a problem today. So I didn't know that would have been the thing back then. So interesting. Too bad. That's not a good thing.
On the translation, I just found another of the negatives, supposedly negative things. I think it's absolutely not negative. No?
Right.
And some of it I don't even understand what is negative about. I'm not really sure what it means to be owl-eyed. Is that a negative?
I guess big eyes?
No, shrewd.
Oh, here, cat-eyed.
Yeah,
in Monroe.
Pallas. Pallas means spear, but in mythology, Pallas was a name of the son of Gaia and Uranus, and Athena killed him and flayed him and used his skin as a shield. So by Pallas, he's referring to Athena because of the owl-eyed, so somebody like a woman who's wise.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing, right? To be wise.
Yeah, but so the point of the text is that it's both, things aren't as negative, and you are also accentuating certain traits. So
Bailey translates it green-eyed. I mean, I think all of these, Charles, are things that the first part of the phrase is a negative in every case. So I wouldn't think that this would be an exception stuck in the middle of the rest. He's talking about something.
What about the two-handed virago with her full dugs?
Well, I think he's saying maybe he feels like you could have breasts that are too big for his taste. I mean, we can't put our current commercial influences on body preferences. Maybe, I don't know, what was popular then.
That's why we have to say that these are his preference.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I do think it's hard to argue with the one that lists the spiteful gossip is a burning torch. Now, that was hard to defend, the spiteful gossip.
Oh, no, Cassius. If you don't have anything nice to say about anybody, come sit by me. It just depends.
I guess you're right. I don't know if there's much more to say about that paragraph that would be useful to say that won't get us in trouble. But, I wonder if he's caricaturing. He's not necessarily. I mean, I really do see this. You can sort of take it really seriously and say that these are his prejudices, but and that's no doubt true. But it's really more of a character. When we say I'm just stammering now.
If he stammers and cannot speak.
Yes, that's right.
And this is interestingly,
he's caught in Venus's net.
Yeah, it's definitely written for men. I mean, there's no equivalent description of male features for female readers. So
it'd be so funny to read today, though.
Yeah, but the next paragraph sort of applies back and forth between the sexes. The next paragraph about the smelling and so forth, that's pretty well applies across the board as far as I understand it.
Much more of a problem back then, right? Although, wouldn't they have had, I thought that they did have the Roman baths and bathe more, so maybe they didn't bathe as much as I'm imagining. Maybe they were smellier.
Maybe the bath was something for the men and not for the women.
Is that true? I thought the women went
I'm not sure. No, not sure. But
I'm not sure either.
If this was around the time of Caesar, that huge aqueduct wouldn't have been built yet by Caligula, but this is just conjecture on my part.
Yeah.
But the Roman bath architecture goes back pretty far, doesn't it?
To other places, yeah. I'd have to look up.
And the other thing, actually, bad smell is really more associated with men than women.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my wife complained often about that, whereas I had never complained.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about the one sentence that sticks out as being maybe slightly different to me is the one about surely there are others too. Surely we have lived without her before. The part about there's many fish in the sea and we've lived without them before. That's a little bit different than.
Where are you? Which?
I'm at the very beginning of what we have as our third paragraph, I think. Yeah, actually.
Oh, okay.
I went down to.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, yet there are others as lovely as she, and time was when you lived without her. That's a slightly different argument than just picturing her.
The plenty of fish.
And I think this argument is also not really valid, because I remember this before I felt lonely, and of course then when you have finally a mate, you're happy, that you do no more feel that lonely.
Okay, that doesn't really address, though, does it, Martin, the issue of whether you have one true soulmate or whether there are many people. That would be probably a good thing for us to talk about in this context, because this excerpt seems to address that directly, that there are others as lovely as her and time was when you lived without her. The issue of whether there are multiple people we could be happy with and be married to or in love with, that bothers a lot of people, I think, that there's some soulmate, that you have to go find your one soulmate, and if you miss the soulmate, then you're out of luck for the rest of your life.
No. I don't mean that. I just fell in love very often with women, but I never got that much feedback. So it was then the first one where I really got good feedback.
Yeah, there are probably fewer relationships you're saying that would be mutual versus the potential ones on any one person's
Yes, that's right.
part.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And also, I don't think he's saying that everyone is interchangeable, because that wouldn't go along with materiality. There are differences, and we respond to people based on their specifics. So I don't think he's saying, oh, you lost your wife, just go get anybody. You could replace.
Yeah.
So you couldn't replace an individual person, but you still have many options. It's not like you've got this one other half of you that you can't live without, and you've got to find that one person out of all the billions of people in the world, or all is lost.
Yeah, a lot of the soulmate stuff comes from a religious perspective. Wouldn't you say that God's made this person for you and from the beginning of time and stuff like that?
Oh, I thought it preceded that. I thought this was Plato.
The soulmate material?
Yeah.
I don't relate those two in my mind.
No, because it's usually been tied to like sanctity of marriage.
Well, I think it's started with Plato, this idealism of matches, and then it got incorporated into religion. Or maybe it preceded Plato. I don't know.
Well, the whole issue of predestination and whether everything has been set in motion by the prime mover would be related to Plato and Aristotle, I guess, yes. I think
the gods creating the humans with two sets of genitalia, 4 hands, 4 feet, and then they were a threat to God and were divided. So then you'd have to go around trying to find their part. It is real similar to what people think about soulmates today.
Right.
The Hindu concept is, it's not so much about soulmates, but that you are destined to meet a certain person.
Right.
And this one definitely predates Plato.
Okay, yeah.
And Elaine, you haven't really said too much about that other than to point out, I think correctly, that he's not saying that people are interchangeable. But I think that probably if we had people listening to the podcast, it probably is a common issue with people. Of course, you don't want to idealize somebody. That's what we've been talking about so far. But then it is a separate issue, I think, as to how much emphasis we put on pursuing a particular one to the exclusion of others, even outside the religious context. And Epicurean isn't going to be concerned that God created a perfect person for you.
Right.
Just in terms of, in general, whether there are soulmates and stuff like that. What do you think Epicurus and Lucretius would say about that?
Well, I think there's no material basis for such a thing being possible.
Mm-hmm.
But, in reality, we are compatible with some people and not with others. And some we kind of instantly hit it off and make a connection. I mean, I'm sure probably all of us here have had an experience of meeting somebody for the first time and just feeling like, man, I just feel like I've known this person forever, and we can have conversations and we hit it off, in surprising ways. And maybe some of those people are still your friends. Maybe a friend you met in high school and you're still friends with because you just hit it off right away. I don't think they would argue against that, because that's a clearly observable real life phenomenon, which is different from an idea of someone who was created to be with you.
That strikes in my mind that he's really not talking about friendship here in these passages much at all. He's treating this subject separately, as if the issue of whether you're friends with your lover is very separate from just the physical relationship part of it.
And that's partly my bias, because I just don't really, I used to get infatuated with people when I was a teenager, but as an adult, I just don't really do that. So maybe I've already taken these actions that he's describing. I try to actually pay attention to the real person in front of me. And I am much more interested in whether I can be a friend, because once I was married for 33 years. If you're going to be in a long marriage, whether or not the person can be a friend to you, I'm going to say is one of the most important parts of the relationship. So in dating, I tend to focus on that as a priority, and he doesn't talk about that. So I don't know, that may be just more modern.
And another aspect, based on what you just said, Elaine, there's that, I forget what the reference is, but there's that recorded passage of Epicurus's advice to a young man about not getting too carried away. It's almost as if this material here is a extension and much more elaboration of that section of what Epicurus would have been talking about. Because, for example, right here where we're talking about when she perfumes, rank as she is, with filthy smells that her maid can't come near her, but make a jest of her. That's almost like juvenile humor. It's almost like he's talking to a young guy who finds the humor in thinking about things like that and giggles about it and so forth.
Yes, and he's focusing on physical as if there's such a thing as perfections and imperfections physically, which I don't think is true. I mean, how can it be? There's no absolute standard, as we just discussed. But the important things in a relationship he never talks about, like, what kind of, are they honest? Are they reliable, trustworthy, kind? So whether they have a flat nose or not is, to me, one of the least critical aspects of whether a relationship is going to be a source of pleasure, as you go on. And yet he's focusing on all these characteristics as if they're, the main things. I don't see things like that. And is that a male perspective?
I believe it may be. I am thinking that much of, What do you think, Charles? What'd you say?
Could be from back then.
Or even for now, from people who still have that more traditional viewpoint. I'm thinking especially when I read this passage, talking about the young man who's all in tears outside the gates of the house where his lover lives and warms the door with kisses and brings flowers and then gets struck by one blast from her armpits. I'm thinking that a lot of this is targeted towards a young male, because that's the classic example of people who get carried away with things like that. I know women do that too, but certainly, I don't know, is it just totally wrong to say that young men can get caught up in this kind of idealization with greater frequency than young women do, or is it about the same, Elaine? You tell me.
Well, I don't know. I am so atypical, I think, at least in what's presented in pop culture, but who knows if that's actually typical. I don't know. That's very confusing. I do find that it is difficult. I would like it if people were if they would get their infatuation tendencies under control, because I don't like dating people who do that. It's really unpleasant. To be the subject or target of idealization I don't like that at all, because what's going to happen next. Eventually, that sort of starry-eyed thing wears off, and then they're like, who the hell are you?
Right, right.
Or worse, you keep up that idealization when things don't line up. It becomes like a bitter rejection.
Yeah.
Because
I think that's the source
standard.
of a lot of what people call love bombing, is not necessarily a planned thing on the part of the love bomber. It's just infatuation, and then it wears off, and they're like, ugh, who are you? Go away. So it's just like, that is a red flag for me. Cassius, you talked about how maybe Ellie and I should do a dating thing.
Yeah.
Here is my piece of advice to kind of complement, I guess, what Lucretius is saying. Watch out for people who idealize you early on. I don't think it's a good sign. That it's to me, it's not reliable. You have no idea what that person's going to think about you further on if they do that. That kind of goes along with what he says here. And if your mistress be of an open temper and not sullen and reserved, she will not so much hide her defects, but hope you will allow for imperfections that are common to the whole sex. And I'd like to rephrase that as, there's no such thing as a imperfection or perfection anyway. There are just features that are variable that you'll like and dislike, and no one person is going to have all the features you prefer.
Yeah, in that sentence he's beginning, it seems to me to kind of moderate his viewpoint, and the next paragraph becomes even more accommodating. Am I the only person who's never heard of the term love bomb?
I haven't heard of it.
For real? Okay.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
That may be more common with women, but there is, that's often used to describe people who have narcissist pattern in relationships, where they will sort of lure you in with over-the-top romantic gestures early on and just be like honed in on you and send you flowers all the time and put you up on a pedestal. And then once they've got you, then they turn their back on you. They devalue you because they've already got you. So you're not worth anything. And it's a kind of a crushing experience for the person who's the target of it. But I don't think it's strictly something narcissists do. I think it's because of infatuation a lot of times. And then the infatuation wears off. It usually doesn't last forever.
Like I said, a column or a show by Ellie and Elaine would be so informative and so popular.
I don't know if I should say this, but my girlfriend's a bit on the infatuation side. And before we were together, she ran into that issue where she was just sort of gave up or like reached like a depressive, cynical viewpoint. Then nothing would hold up to, or like nothing would either meet or seemed to resemble that ideal.
Yeah.
But even before we were together, I would talk about, we were good friends before that for a while, but we would talk about just different viewpoints of love and romance, and I talked about Lucretius and, the Epicurean perspective quite a bit. It's a little ironic now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's totally applicable there, where if you apply that sort of ideal standard, then you're going to face the hard truth eventually that people aren't like that.
Yeah. And I think you can learn not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people are doomed to approaching relationships that way, and they can use tricks like these, maybe not holding people up to some commercial standard of beauty, but to really think, well, I don't know this person yet. Let me get to know this person before I decide if we're compatible. Wait a little bit. Find out about them, what they're like. What they're like when they get angry. Are they honest? I would focus more on those things.
And that's a much better alternative today than Lucretius's advice is just take another woman.
Well, he's giving lots of different advices. He's not saying that's the only thing to do.
Yeah, and Charles, I think it can help people who tend to get infatuated. It can help them to date more than one person at a time, because that helps keep them from putting so much weight on one possibility and date more than one person, and just get time to get to know somebody, and maybe one of the relationships will become clear, like, okay, this person, I really do like this person, and I want a longer term relationship with them, rather than just jumping into it and getting attached before you know what you're doing.
Or maybe many back to back in rapid succession.
Charles, I detect in your voice, it's kind of easy to go too far in the other direction here. See, he's talking about, yes, you can avoid the hazards of love by having more than one romantic partner maybe over time, but that doesn't mean you should just wipe out the idea of having romantic love. Part of having the multiple experiences would be to get better at your ability to implement that activity in life. He's not saying just totally run from all relationships. He's saying to just not idealize them. Be realistic about them. Right. And I was almost going to wait to the end to try to bring that particular point in. But the more I think about this is so deeply philosophical, because what is Platonism? What is all this virtue stuff other than idealization of something that really does not exist? Lucretius and Epicurus are telling people to be realistic about the nature of things and the way things really are, and not to over-idealize things. He's certainly not telling you to fall back into just total nihilism and total despair and committing suicide because nothing's worthwhile. He's far from doing that either. Right. But the whole issue of idealization of the good, probably in life, that's what romantic love is, where people make that mistake as much as anywhere else. It's a practical example of the error and the pain that comes from idealization of things that don't exist.
Oh, and I would say this brings up that idealization is not just strictly something we learn from Plato, right? It's not just a philosophical deviation. It's something that regular humans tend to do, but which can cause them unhappiness. So it may have been it persisted as an evolved feature of humans because it led to successful reproduction. But that does not mean it will lead to your overall pleasure. So you have your own self-interest, which can be different from, as Dawkins put it, the selfish gene. So you have a chance to think about this, and do you want to just say, oh, that's just the way I was born to be? You know, I was evolved to idealize people, or can you use your also evolved ability to think and notice consequences and, you know, make observations to say, oh, this has not led to pleasure for me, and I have an option to do it differently.
Yep.
Silence.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I don't know where to move on from there.
I'm just very impressed with the idea that this probably the best way to communicate Epicurean philosophy to new people would be to put up a show, Epicurean philosophy through romantic counseling, with Elaine and Ellie and our experts on Lucretius. I do see parallels that ordinary people who aren't into philosophy would see the connection between what's important to be realistic and not idealistic.
And I mean, thinking about that, this is to some degree a thing that humans do. Humans who've never heard of Plato, that it could explain some of the difficulty convincing people to not idealize, because it is something humans do. You know, that makes it sticky. And so we really need to focus on observations of the bad outcomes to you of doing that, about how it's really not in your interest of a pleasurable life to idealize anything. I mean, I think that's going to be a big key to spreading the philosophy. Not just saying Plato's wrong, but every time you idealize something, what is the consequence? What does that do to you? How does it clash with actual reality and guide you to make choices that are not consistent with reality?
And you know, romantic affairs like this is really right up there in intensity with issues like gods and life after death and things like that. People who get consumed in romance, I mean, you can ruin your life or really do well for yourself in this department. This department is more intense for people in many cases than worrying about things like life after death or gods or anything like that. This is not a low-level issue, I don't think.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
That's a good point.
This last section reminds me of when Harry met Sally.
How so?
Nor does the woman always breathe with feigned desire, feigned and strict embrace with him she loves. Let's look at Monroe. Nor does the woman sigh always with feigned passion when she locks in her embrace and joins with her body. And Bailey, basically the same. It reminds me
Elaine, is there any
of
particular
the fake orgasm.
Guys, I was going to say, is there any particular part of Harry and Sally that you're talking about? Or
when they're sitting in the restaurant and she's having the orgasm and, showing him that women can fake it. Of course, easier for women to get away with that.
Charles, has that example left the common understanding of people in their 20s and 30s, or do you know what she's talking about?
They're in the diner, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
It's a pretty persistent cultural meme now.
Apparently so.
And it's like, so he says she doesn't always breathe with feigned desire. So he is aware that sometimes she does. Apparently, that's not a new thing. That's something that has been around.
But the limit of the cultural meme may be that it may not have hit Germany or Thailand. Martin, do you know what she's talking about? Martin?
His wife is yelling at him.
I was talking into the mute microphone. Okay, no, I think I know what I mean. It was a movie scene where now I forgot the name of the actress. That she
Meg
makes a noise.
Ryan? Is it Meg Ryan?
Yeah.
Exactly. So this
See?
one also became viral in Germany.
Yep.
That was a long time ago, actually, no?
Yes.
Hey, it'd be interesting to know if, how many years that meme will last. I mean, it's pretty timeless.
I saw a French commercial, which I guess was made after that a woman was testing an apartment to rent on what response she get when she did the same noise. And then there was some neighbor knocking, then she didn't take that apartment.
Oh, love it. Oh,
Oh.
that's great. Funny. So she doesn't always have a fake orgasm, but sometimes it's real. She's not just lying back and thinking of England and making fake noises.
We could just pass over the issue of the dogs in the street and then get to the last sentence here and say they would not do that if they weren't engaged in mutual joys which cheat them with delight and hold them fast. The pleasure then is common to them both.
I don't know if it helps to think of them as their passion like a wild animal.
Yeah. Just that it's not, it's not a cultural made-up thing. It's biological and it's based in pleasure. The species wouldn't have made it without that pleasure incentive, maybe. So.
And he's not saying don't engage in it. He's not saying that this pleasure is something to be avoided at all costs. He's saying there are ways to engage in it that aren't so damaging.
Well, it's interesting to me that by saying that sometimes women are enjoying sex, it's almost like there was some confusion on that point.
Well, he's previously mentioned in this context, he's talking about, is it the women of the town? So I think Charles was talking last week about prostitutes and so forth. So I guess they were pretty worldly, however you want to call it. I thought that you mentioned that topic last week. Yes.
Well, but he never says, "Oh, guess what? Men enjoy sex," because that's obvious. But he has to actually lay out a case for women enjoying sex. Like by referring to dogs in the street, it's like we can tell they enjoy it because dogs in the street enjoy it. Oh my gosh. Wow. So that is kind of fascinating that he needs to do that. I wonder how men today, I don't know. I hope it's clear to men today that women also enjoy sex.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a duty, So, I mean, for the man. So then he knows the woman wants it.
Well, yeah, that's the case. He hasn't said anything about that, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this nor does the woman always breathe with faint desires. This might just be a counterpoint because in the paragraphs before it's shown that the women play tricks to trap the man. And now he says it's that they really can feel love so that means to me it refers more to this cheating before that it means they do not always cheat.
Yeah, but he doesn't apply that line of reasoning to men. He doesn't talk about men fooling women. I mean, it is pretty one-sided that he has to establish this last sentence. The pleasure then is common to them both. That seems to be a difficult thing to establish requiring evidence.
Not necessarily, because he doesn't say anything about men cheating, so he doesn't have to make the counterpoints here.
Yeah, but why doesn't he? Why does he not talk about men not enjoy, men lying about enjoying sex? That doesn't seem to have occurred to him.
Yeah, I mean, this with a man that would hardly work.
Right, and it also wouldn't be any advantage to the man, right? Because the men at that time were in the position of power relative to women. They wouldn't have any need to do that, would they? Well, it's just that he talks about women being deceptive in attracting sexual interest and infatuation, but he doesn't talk about that at all. Being
about men doing the same
thing. And I think it would be unnecessary at that time for a man. The man wouldn't have any requirement to do that, being in a position of more power.
I mean, this was maybe in Rome so, but there was this culture before the Romans dominated the area in central Italy. That one shows women as equal to men. So before Rome, there was a time when it was not a clearly male-dominated society.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I agree with that. And then today, because women are able to choose, there can be some element of deceptiveness in men in attracting a partner, saying things about their, like maybe their work that aren't true, or their age. And I find on the dating apps, men will lie about their age sometimes, but not all of them are doing that. So I would say probably not most of them are doing that.
But it's pretty much a long-standing topic that there's courting behavior. That means the male gives quite the impression what he would all do for his girl, but once they're married, so to say, then he's somewhat decommitting in what he said. No?
Yeah, it can be. And that can be true with women too. So it's the job of the person who's the beneficiary of that show, of that display, to figure out who's just doing that as a window dressing in the courtship phase, and who actually will continue to do those things in the long term. That is a big job when you're dating, to figure that out.
I mean, even for the man, this courting behavior, he means it honest. No? It's in most things. He's not cheating. He really believes that his love is so strong that he will do that. No? But then, in the reality, how it works out, then it turns out that he is no more as strongly motivated as he was before. No?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying, and that goes along with infatuation. And that is why, and that happens with women too. And that's why I would advise both sides to give it enough time for that part to wear off. If they're going to stop doing those things for you, or, just for the relationship, then you probably want to find out before you're financially entangled, at least.
Yeah, I was going to mention how this predated like a lot of notions of chivalry and like male courtship. But then I remembered the story of, the Odyssey and all of Penelope's suitors, and how none of that was mentioned here.
Right.
Well, maybe there wasn't time to mention everything that he would have wanted to mention, and that would apply to us today, because we are probably about to run long and need to think about concluding the episode for today.
Oh, this one went by fast.
Unless it did go by fast. Of course, if anybody has any major topics you'd like to cover today, please say them, and we won't start to close yet. But
is there some more of this next time? I haven't looked to see the next episode.
It's amazing how next time turns to something, again, in your department, Elaine, because he talks about how you can choose the sex of your child by who is on top, or something like that, if I recall correctly. Right, Charles?
Okay.
Yeah, it's very
Oh, yeah.
I hope I haven't misstated the topic, but he continues on we may have 2 more episodes on love and sex before the end of the book 4. But okay, for today, closing thoughts from Martin.
I have no closing thought.
Okay. Charles?
There was this video I saw quite a few months back about Lucretius, and this is going to require a lot of background information, so it's going to be better for a forum post. But between the comparison, or the character paragraph, and what's known today culturally as simping. So there's more to this section that we can talk about later.
We can't leave it quite there, Charles, because we probably ought to briefly define what simping means.
Oh, God. That's why I wanted to leave it for the forums.
Elaine, do you know what that term means?
No.
Okay. In
Just
short,
define it shortly.
It's more along the idolization discussion.
I've seen the word used on Twitter, it seems like, but I don't know what it means.
Okay. When I make the thread, I'll link it into the discussion on this part.
As a general rule, it would be great for anybody who has comments and extensions of what we're talking about to post on the forum and in the thread for this episode, or any episode. Elaine.
Well, I would just say I think these are seriously important things to think about for almost every human. Most of us care about sex and relationships, romantic relationships, to some degree. And there's a lot of potential for misery, but also potential for pleasure if you think about what you're doing.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I've tended to think about this section over the years as being something that's kind of amusing and practical, but something that maybe was less significant in the philosophy to worry about from some of the more purely philosophical material. But the more I think about it, I do see that, as Elaine, you've just said, this is an area of life that people experience intense emotions in, and it is extremely important to them, and really is almost as important as an issue like life or death and whether God's telling you how to live and so forth. And in fact, for people who are caught up in it, it's far more important than whether they're going to live or die tomorrow or whether there's a God in heaven and so forth. People caught up in romantic love are consumed by this topic. And so that's probably a very good illustration of how important it is to avoid idealism, to avoid an inaccurate view of the world, because the danger and the pain that can arise if you approach this subject with the wrong premises is incredible. And so it's worth the attention that he gives it here, and maybe is worth a lot more of our attention in working with Epicurean philosophy today.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts from anybody, or else we'll begin to close? Okay, well, we'll have another interesting episode next week, and hopefully we can get some commentary from people who post on the internet when they hear the podcast. So thanks, everybody. We'll come back in another week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.